Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a new weekly podcast shining a spotlight on Australian fiction. My name is Claudine Tinellis. As a writer and avid reader, I love chatting about books. And in this podcast, I'll chat to authors, publishers and readers, giving you, dear listener, insight into what's hot on the Australian fiction scene. So if you're looking for your next book recommendation or just want to know more about Aussie fiction writers, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and enjoy. Benjamin Stevenson is an award-winning stand-up comedian and author whose first novel, Greenlight, was shortlisted for the Ned Kelly Award in 2019. He is one half of a hugely popular comedy show called The Stevenson Experience, which has sold out appearances at the Melbourne International Comedy Festival, various comedy festivals around Australia, and the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. He has appeared on ABC TV, Channel 10 and the Comedy Channel and worked with some of today's most notable comedians, including Amy Schumer, the Doug Anthony All-Stars, Jamoan, Dave Hughes and Fiona O'Loughlin, amongst many others. When he's not on stage or writing, Benjamin works with some of Australia's best-loved authors as a literary agent at Curtis Brown Australia. His second novel, Either Side of Midnight, was released by Penguin Random House on the 1st of September, and wow, does he know how to pack a punch with his writing. This novel was completely gripping, utterly thought-provoking and terrifying in its exploration of the power of influence in today's society. Intricately plotted with lots of twists and turns, it kept me guessing until its breathtaking conclusion. I'm delighted to have the chance to speak with Benjamin on the podcast today. Hi, Benjamin.
Hello, thanks for having me. I wonder if the bio needs updating though. In COVID times, instead of a comedian that sold out shows from the Melbourne Comedy Festival to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, I should update it with a comedian who has cancelled shows from the Melbourne Comedy Festival to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Dear, oh dear. Oh, well, I'm sure you're not alone in that regard.
No, not at all. And I'm not bitter. Definitely shouldn't have just got off the plane back from Scotland.
Well, Benjamin, I just wanted to say congratulations on the publication of your second novel. I thoroughly enjoyed the read and I'm super keen to go back and read Greenlight now.
Thank you. That was kind of the, I guess that's kind of the goal of any second novel is you have to make it stand on its own and also make it exciting to read the first book without spoiling the first book, which is a tricky tightrope. So something I thought about a lot while writing it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're facing that, second book syndrome. Can it live up to the first book? But also, trying to keep readers on the hook.
Yeah, second book syndrome is something that people mention a bit. I don't have second book syndrome while writing it. I have second chapter syndrome, in which anything I'm writing at the moment I think is not as good as the page before it in my current draft manuscript. So I suppose I have constant second book syndrome, even in my first book. I'm like, oh, yesterday's drafting day was so good, and this one's so bad. So I feel like I was a bit immune to that.
Looking inside the cover of this book, the testimonials read like a who's who of Australian crime writing. People like Chris Hammer, Candice Fox and Dervla McTiernan have all sung your praises. And then there's the cover quotes from Australian fiction heavyweights like the wonderful Jane Harper and Leanne Moriarty. Now, I know you're no stranger to working with Australian authors, but how does it make you feel to hear such authors praise your work in this way?
It just feels really nice. No matter what readers think of the book, in which I hope that they all love it and enjoy it, when a peer pats you on the back and says, I really, really enjoyed this, I admit I still get a bit starstruck by all of the heavyweights, and it just makes me feel a little bit special, a foot taller. So it's lovely that they've all donated their time to read it and said such kind things about it.
Absolutely wonderful. Now, as I mentioned in my introduction, this was a novel that puts modern technology and the power of influence that can be exercised through that technology up front and centre. So I wondered, can you tell me what was your what-if moment, the seed of inspiration that began this novel?
Yeah, so the opening of the novel, in the prologue, a television host is in the middle of doing a broadcast that's broadcast live, and his cast and crew thinks that he's a little bit nervous. It's one of those light variety programs. He's a comedian and he's doing his monologue, the kind of Jimmy Fallon, David Letterman monologue. And everyone thinks he's a bit nervous because he's going to pull a stunt. He might propose to his girlfriend, they reckon. But then at the end, he turns to the camera and instead of pulling a ring from his pocket, he pulls a gun from under the desk and he shoots himself. And that's the opening of the book. And that was a scene that buried itself in my mind and wouldn't go away because there was a woman in the United States who was a Fox News reader that shot herself on live television in the 70s. And having been behind the scenes on television shows, I knew how dramatic that could be, and I knew the environment and the bustle and the production crew, talking behind the scenes and the host being nervous and sweating under the lights. And I felt like I could really capture that. And so it kind of buried in my conscious and stayed there until I wrote it down as the prologue for the next book. And then I kind of sat with it and thought, okay, how is this actually a murder mystery? Like, it's a very dramatic opening, but it's almost impossible to make a murder mystery. And so I sat on it for about 6 months until a few other things, which are probably spoilers, so I'll mention them obliquely, but until I found a way in which I could turn it into a murder mystery. And that kind of, those two influences side by side grew that original idea of this woman in the 70s into what it is now. And one of the things I was thinking about that helped me unlock it was that happened in the 70s, over 40 years ago, and it went up and it was horrifying and it went out live, but then it went away. Now we've got the internet, so nothing goes away. So that presented a unique challenge, and at a craft level, it presented me a locked room mystery because it's got a million witnesses that have seen the murder/suicide happen. And yeah, so that was kind of how I unlocked it, was to think about, well, what if it happened now with YouTube and streaming and things that once things happen online, they stay online forever. So it was a very interesting concept to play with the rules of a murder mystery, that you have to try and solve without something that everyone's seen happen, without cheating.
Indeed, it was a fascinating premise, I have to say, and a killer opening, literally. So what research did you have to do in the course of writing this novel?
Yeah, I'm not a particularly heavy researcher. I tend to try and learn enough to get my plot moving, and then I try not to research too much because, to be honest, it drags down I'm an easy procrastinator, and so if I think, oh, this page needs some research, I'll blow the day. So I try and do all my research at the start and hold it in my head, and then tell my own story, and then go back in stuff that needs very specific, technical research or something. But there's a lot of themes in this book. There's themes of mental health, and there's themes of technology, and there's themes of law that I did need to get my head around. And so I guess what I was most interested in was, rather than hard research, I'm interested in things, memoirs and first-person accounts and essays that could help inform certain character elements. And then in terms of the legal aspects of the book, it was actually really difficult because I did that research at the start, and I had a good hold on my story, but the story that I was writing was so cutting edge that the law changed 3 or 4 times while I was writing the book. And it's not changed yet, but there's certain elements of the law that are under appeal based on specific instances in my book. So my book had to deal with the way in which the law is changing and growing around some specific criminal element, and what makes a murder and what doesn't, and what is a crime and what isn't. And so I had to do quite intricate research for that, but I also think it wears quite lightly on the page. I think the book is about a crime, but it's more about people doing the wrong thing than actually saying, well, they're guilty of this, I think, in the end. So hopefully I was able to use that research to create those opinions rather than actually hinging on the specific legal precedents, though they are included in the book.
So, Benjamin, for listeners out there who haven't read your book, can you tell me a little bit more about the story?
Yeah, sure. So after it opens with this TV host's suicide, his identical twin brother, Harry, doesn't believe that it can be a suicide. So he hires my amateur detective, Jack, to look into it. And Jack is in jail at the start of this book, following the events of the previous book. And Harry approaches him in jail, and Jack says, you're mad. There's evidence. It was broadcast live. Everyone believes it but you. And Harry kind of says, well, look, he's my brother and I know him, and I don't believe that he would do that. And offers Jack quite an enticing bit of money to do it. So Jack accepts his money to kind of be dragged along. And as he kind of looks into it more, he starts to believe certain elements, which, like I said, that was kind of the unlocking of that opening scene, is which bits here won't make sense to a person looking at the scene that otherwise has an obvious conclusion. But if you can find one thing that niggles you, and so Jack keeps finding these things that niggled him, and it brings him closer into the investigation such that he does want to solve it, and he finds things in both Sam and Harry's past and starts looking around, and he starts to find out that there are more than what he thought there was a way to kill someone.
Yes, indeed. Now, perhaps it's no coincidence that two important characters in this book are identical twins, Sam and Harry Midford, since you're an identical twin yourself, and I think it's safe to say that the relationship between brothers is a significant theme in this book. Was this something that you consciously set out to explore?
Yeah, absolutely. I really wanted to look at brotherhood as a whole, regardless of being twins or not. I think that Jack has quite a complex relationship with his brother, who is in a coma from an accident in their childhood. And so he grapples with that in parallel with Harry and Sam's relationship. And Harry's kind of looking back at their relationship is both incredibly close but incredibly fractured, and the way it's presented. And I really wanted to look at the bonds that ran parallel between those two relationships and the bonds that ran contrary to it. So I wanted to dip into that. But in terms of my own personal life, yeah, it's the closeness of an identical twin. And I think that in this book, the twin, in any book, in any crime novel that opens with a suicide, I think you only have a limited number of time until the reader, the reader has to acknowledge that something else is going on here, because it's a crime novel and there's 300 pages left and something has to happen. So there's a certain, at a technical level, there's a certain element in which one character has to not believe that it's a suicide and help it guide us down the path. And I thought that the only person that could realistically do that and be able to say, I know him because I am him, basically, was his identical twin brother. And then on a conceptual level, I was really interested to write a thriller about twins that doesn't use them as a salacious plot point, that actually portrays them as real people rather than people that just look the same for the sake of any twists. This is not a spoiler, but it's not one of those flippy twinny books. So they're just brothers, and I was interested in that kind of closeness that they have. And also, he's dead for the book, so it helps to kind of have his voice through someone. Not that I'm exploring anything supernatural or telepathic or stuff, but that myth of twins, that closeness, I do think it allows Sam to speak through the page a little bit, because Harry can look at something and say, Sam would have thought this, and it kind of helps move the plot along.
Much has been made in literature and also popular culture, I guess, about the powerful connection that exists between identical twins. Is this something that you and your brother share?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very close. We don't share anything like the finishing each other's sentences or feeling each other's pain or anything. We like to tell people that the only way that we can feel each other's pain is if we're standing right in front of each other and somebody throws a javelin, in which case we will both feel it. But in terms of closeness, I guess in terms of knowing someone else, and I think that so much in fiction and literature is how well the author can get the reader to know someone. And so that inside these characters, yeah, it's that closeness, it's that knowledge of each other that allows you to unlock a lot of human nature that you can discuss by using that relationship. But yeah, me and my brother are close. He's annoyed that I killed him off because he thinks that Sam is based on him. But I told him that if he wants to be annoyed about it, then he has to accept. He can accept that I killed him off and pretend that he is the charismatic, handsome one that hosts a TV show, or he can accept that I'm the handsome, charismatic one, and that he didn't get killed off. So he's chosen to choose that he's been killed off here so that he can remain handsome, because Sam's the handsome one in the book.
But they're identical.
I know, but it's more about the vibe. It's more the charisma. But so, I didn't even tell him certain elements of it, and he read it and he goes, "You've killed me off." And I'm like, "You've assumed that you're the successful one here."
Oh, that's hilarious. Benjamin, increasingly in books these days, we see references to podcasts, in particular true crime podcasts. Many are incredibly popular and become aids to solving cold cases. So I guess it's no great surprise to see a modern protagonist like Jack Quick being the host of his own true crime podcast. But in the context of this book, the podcast is just another platform for exerting influence, isn't it?
Yeah, certainly. Jack's role as a podcaster was something I really explored in my first book, which was published in 2018. And it was kind of before there were lots of lead characters that were podcasters. So basically the first book was very heavily about Jack being a podcaster. And what he did was he made some editorial decisions in a podcast he was making about a murder trial. And he effectively got someone out of jail that then he started to believe he may not have been innocent after all. So he goes back and solves the crime. And the theme of that book is very much about the power of his words and his choices. And it was about things like making a murderer that, you're watching them on TV literally as the trial has happened. And how can we find an unbiased jury in a country where everybody has listened to Serial or watched The Jinx? And so I was very aware of that in the first book. Podcasters have popped up a little bit more through fiction and film in the 2 years since I released that first book. So while it's still Jack's character, I more used him as a way into the TV studio where he used to work. So it's kind of how he gets involved is because he used to work there. And so he knows how the production works, which involves him in this new murder. But he's very, very aware of the power of what he can say and do with his kind of broadcast capabilities in this book. And he's a lot more honest in this book as well. He learnt he got in trouble for lying a lot in the first one. So he's kind of learned those lessons. But yeah, he's very aware of that power.
As am I after reading your book, I have to say. Just about anyone has a platform these days to influence other people. I mean, Instagram and Twitter, YouTube channels and TikTok.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, it was interesting. It kind of doesn't matter what the platform is. If you're reaching one person in a particular way, then you're reaching that person in a particular way. So I think that everything anyone does online these days, I think can be important or influential in certain ways. With a novel that deals with certain dark themes, even though the fact that there's a suicide that drives the plot is on the back cover and I'm talking about it, so it's not a spoiler, but we had to decide where to put the trigger warning, the content warning in the book. And it goes at the back because if you content warning the themes of the book, it spoils the book. But so we had to really think about our responsibility in, do we need to put this up the front or should we put it up the back? Because it's dealing with those kind of issues.
Now, you mentioned earlier on that whilst you were writing this book, there were certain changes in the law or certain changes prefaced. The law is notoriously slow to catch up with technology, but in these circumstances, do you think the law will ever catch up?
No, I don't think it will. I think there are too many elements in our society that like to put blame on individuals. And I think there has to be an overall acceptance of our power over each other in order to fully accept some of the things that have happened. So in short, no, but it is catching up. I mean, compared to where it started 10 years ago, I think people are slowly figuring it out.
I wanted to know if you thought there was any drawback of capturing the current zeitgeist in your writing.
I've never thought of myself as a particularly edgy writer, so I've been surprised that some have found it edgy. And there was a particular, the TikTok incident that happened the week my book released, I think was really interesting because I suppose it exacerbated some of the dark elements that I was talking about. As a writer, I was basically, when I was writing this book, it had to be finished 9 months ago, I was trying to think about what future dangers we are up against as a society. And as it happens, I picked them relatively well and crashed head on into it. So I think there's not a danger, but I think as a writer, I have to be aware of if you're too prescient or you want to talk about things that are relevant and modern, but I do think that there's a certain element of time that needs to pass when talking about certain things, especially in a commercial thriller novel that's packaged for entertainment. Absolutely. So, I'm certainly aware that I'm right on the edge of what's happening today, and I want my books to be ultra modern and ultra relevant, but I don't want to be taking the mick out of anything that's happening right now that is genuinely serious. So it's kind of, it's a line that I walk, and I think I walk it well, but it's something that I think about.
I want to talk about Jack Quick for a moment. He appears in your first book, as you've said, as you've mentioned previously, and it's fair to say he's fairly damaged. Where did your inspiration for this character come from?
He's one of those people that just popped up in my head and then just grew on the page. So he's not inspired on anything in particular. I really wanted to I wanted to make him real, and I wanted to make him have real flaws rather than crime detectives who are often just alcoholics or divorced, and that's their whole character arc. And I wanted to really focus on him as as a young man who is struggling with what he's struggling with. And so a lot of his character traits develop thematically around themes of masculinity, which can be seen in his relationship with his father and his brother, and not knowing his place in the world rather than specifically drilling down into. I think that because he suffers from an eating disorder, which is bulimia, and I think that bulimia can be seen as a kind of one note illness, that it's a body image thing. But his is driven by PTSD and, like I said, his sense of place in the world and his sense of masculinity, because it's so commonly seen as a feminine illness. And so that kind of drove that development. And I just wanted him to be real. I wanted him to be human and flawed. He can't take a punch. He's not a type of character that can go around and kick down doors and solve crime. If he gets into a fight, he's done for. So he has to handle investigating the cases a little bit more realistically than bombastically. And I thought it was just really interesting to kind of travel with him through that.
So is it your intention to write more Jack Quick stories?
Well, I feel like I've been a bit mean to him. It goes through the ringer in the first book, but he really goes through it in the second. So, yeah, I think he needs a bit of a break. I'm working on my third book at the moment, and at the moment it's not a Jack Quick book. That said, when I started writing Either Side of Midnight, it wasn't a Jack Quick book, and he wormed his way in. But I think I will return to him in future, but I want to write the Jack Quick books. Like we were talking about, walking that tightrope of kind of edginess and modernity. I think that I need some issue that I'm really fascinated in that he can explore with depth, and his books are particularly gritty. The next one I'm writing is not quite as dark, and so it doesn't suit his character quite as well. So, yeah, I hope to return, but I think when I have I used the word bombastic before, when I have a more bombastic story, I think it's not quite suited for Jack, but when I really want to dig into something dark and take a look at the dark side of humanity, I think that Jack will come back in. Also, he's a podcaster. How many murders can I get him tied up in and it still be realistic? So I'm very aware of the Midsummer Murders curse of there's a lot of murders that these old ladies seem to wander through. Yeah, I'll give him a break, and then when the right story comes along, I'll put him back in, I think, in the future sometime, but not the next one.
There was one aspect of this novel that really intrigued me, and it's intrigued me in light of current affairs. I'm currently watching the TV special on the Lindy Chamberlain convictions and the investigation into the death of her daughter. And there's a lot of discussion about framing the narrative, of making the evidence fit the narrative the media wanted or the police wanted. And that's something that you explore in this book as well. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think we just have to make a tacit acceptance as a society that these things that are presented to us these days, they're entertainment. It doesn't matter how serious they are. In a way, it doesn't matter if it's a podcast done by some bloke in his garage, or if it's a podcast by the New York Times, or a HBO documentary versus a YouTube series by someone investigating something. They're all designed in a way to get clicks or to sell, to get that watch on Netflix or to sell tickets in a theatre. And in order to do that, they have to make concessions. And by make concessions, I don't even mean knowingly lie, but if you make a 90-minute film out of 100 hours of footage, you can't put everything in it, full stop. And I think that it's an interesting thing that some people aren't quite aware of, that these things are packaged as entertainment, and therefore their narratives are crafted to develop specific narratives. And so that was really interesting to me, especially in the kind of true crime podcast genre, because even the ones that take an ambivalent stance, I think, have some kind of stance. But even you listen to one, your friends watch one, you have a dinner party, and half the people will be like, he's definitely guilty, and half the people will be like, he's definitely innocent. And so I was just, interested in that, in how it manipulates again, it comes down to access. It's so easy to absorb these kind of things these days. And that kind of armchair detective, I think, really plays a role and can kind of, almost get in the way too. So, which is what Jack is very good at, getting in the way. So that's kind of where I drove that theory.
Now, I can't think of two more different ends of the entertainment spectrum. On the one hand, you entertain people with comedy, and on the other, you write these thrillers and explore quite dark themes. So I wanted to know if you always wanted to write crime?
Yeah, I have. It's easily my favourite genre of literature. I think that good crime can say a lot about human nature. When people are at their darkest, it can really crack them open. So there's lots of mileage there, and that's why I've always liked crime. As well as I like things that are particularly thrilling. I think crime allows you to have a whole set of complex and dynamic plots, and I also really enjoy the fact that there's kind of this subtext of the rules of crime. Crime readers are very savvy and they know what they like and they know their rules. And I'm not saying they're all Annie Wilkes, but they're all aware of what an author is doing and what they should be doing in the genre. And the quest to both satisfy that and subvert it, I think, is fascinating. So that's why I love crime. But I think writing the dark bits is good because when I'm on stage telling jokes, it kind of uses the other side of the brain. So you write jokes and then I go to the novel and then I write about something darker or with depth. But it's actually quite interesting because they're mostly the same, because a crime novel turns on the same thing as a joke turns on, which is the element of surprise. So really I just see it as writing a long, extended joke, and then the end turn, the reveal of the killer, is the same as when you're seeking an audience reaction. It actually uses the same principles of dropping clues, masking things, revealing them at specific times, things like pacing. So it's actually quite similar.
So, Benjamin, as I mentioned in my introduction, you work for Curtis Brown, and I wanted to know, how did you become a literary agent?
The answer is just kind of did start working here and am still working here. I went to uni. I got a master's in publishing. I studied engineering originally, and then I did stand-up comedy tours for about 10 years. And then I wanted to go back to uni when I moved to Sydney. Went back to uni, landed at Curtis Brown after that as a receptionist, and then kind of have just worked my way through. It was really exciting to me to work here because, like I said, I've always liked crime and thrillers, and I was able to get my hands on crime and thriller manuscripts and kind of work with authors on their plots and their structures and stuff. And then a couple of years in, I started to think, I think I know these rules. I think I know how to do it, and I'd like to try. So that's kind of worked quite nicely with actually starting to write books myself.
Obviously, you're in a unique position to be able to view the publishing process now from two different angles. Do you think your experience as a literary agent makes writing easier?
I think it's a double-edged sword. I think that I think that some things are easier, and I'm very aware of what needs to be done and how best to do it. And then on the other side, I'm a little bit too aware. So I kind of sometimes I try and put the blinkers on. Every artist is a victim of self-comparison, but I think when you see so much of it, you have to learn to block it out, particularly when I'm writing a novel. When I'm reading stuff that's just fantastic, I start to think, I can't do it like that. So that's the double-edged sword. And yeah, it's a bit hard to kind of, brag about my own work in publicity and stuff, because I think normally I'm on the other side of it, bragging about other people's work.
Will you continue to balance these very diverse roles, do you think?
That's a tricky question because my boss probably will listen to this podcast. So the answer is no. I mean, I love both my careers. Well, all three of my careers, actually. And finding that perfect balance is obviously something that's important to me. But at the moment, I'm really loving throwing myself at all of them. I'm still young enough to have the energy to put my all into books and the work and stand-up tours, hopefully, when COVID reopens. So I'm planning on using that energy until I run out of it, and then we'll see.
Oh, I love that answer. Well done. Benjamin, many writers listen to this podcast, and I wondered, given your experience in publishing, you might offer some tips for writers working on a novel or looking to get published.
It's about getting the words down, really. I think some people are better editors and some people are better first drafters. But it doesn't particularly matter because once the words are done, they're done. It's that looking at it and not having it done that is intimidating. My best tip that I think is important is to think about that 30-second pitch and be able to sum up your hook. And it doesn't have to be crime or thriller. The hookiness of any book, I think, is so important. And if you can't put it in 30 seconds, then I don't think you know what your book's about. It's something that I always tell myself. And so it's about really knowing what the book's about. And then the other thing that I always look for when I'm reading, when I'm choosing a book from the bookshop, is I want suspense on every page. And by suspense, I mean it in the most literal definition of suspense. So it's asking questions that need resolving. It doesn't mean will that person get shot or not in the context of a crime novel. It's genuine suspense. It can be, will that person talk to that other person? When will these characters meet? What will happen here? Where are they going? And it can apply to any genre, but I do believe that suspense on every single page is really, really valuable. And then the other tip is don't kill the dog, because people don't like it when you kill dogs. You can kill as many people as you want, but don't kill the dog. That's my number one tip.
I would definitely write that one down and put it above my desk.
Yeah, absolutely. People hate it. Readers just reel. They'll read the most violent book, and you'll see them on Goodreads or something, and they'll be like, I really, really couldn't handle what happened to the dog.
Benjamin, if listeners wanted to learn more about you and your books, where can they find you?
Just online, just Google Benjamin Stevenson. I've got a website. If they want to watch my comedy, it's the Stevenson Experience, also a website. And then otherwise, Penguin Random House's website for grabbing a copy of this book.
Benjamin, it's been fascinating and illuminating chatting with you today. Thank you very much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Well, that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes or drop me a line via my Instagram at Claudine Tinellis or on my webpage, claudinetинellis.com. Thanks for listening. Until next time, happy reading.